Last month, my son Ethan was nearly taken from me physically and legally while the entire town protected a predator dressed as a janitor. I lost custody for 48 hours and nearly my sanity. Now Victor Morrison is behind bars, and the news won't stop replaying my scream outside the courthouse. But it's not over. I won't stop until every adult who enabled him is held accountable. I used to think the school was the safest place for Ethan. When Mr. Doyle returned after suspension, Vic Morrison shook his head in disgust, calling it a disgrace. I felt oddly reassured. Vic always made parents feel safe, but Ethan started clinging to me after school, whispering about the man with keys. I told myself it was nothing, just a phase. Looking back, the signs were blinking neon. I ignored them. During parent-teacher night, Vic stood by the doors, smiling and greeting everyone like a hometown hero. I introduced him to Ethan's father. Trying to ease tensions, Vic chuckled about bathroom incidents and tight budgets, and everyone laughed, but Ethan gripped my hand, refusing to meet his eyes that night. I found Ethan's drawing Vic's crooked grin, a crying stick figure, and a janitor's cart. I tucked it away, dismissing it as imagination I shouldn't have. Ethan started wetting the bed again, something he hadn't done in years. I asked his teacher, Ms. Raines, about any bullying. She paused, then said, "Kids go through phases." That same week, Vic caught me in the hallway, asking if Ethan was acting out at home. His smile was too knowing. That night, Ethan begged not to go to school. I pressed him, but he clammed up. I called my ex. He blamed me for overreacting. I requested a meeting with the principal. She smiled too tightly, brushing off my concerns. "Vic's been with us for years," she said. "A model employee." I mentioned Ethan's drawings, but she claimed children misinterpret things. I showed her a new one, Vic's cart next to a crying boy. Her smile faded. "You should focus on Ethan's behavior," she snapped. I left, furious. That night, my custody hearing update arrived. Vic was listed as a character witness. I called Thomas Doyle, the teacher who once got suspended for false accusations. He hesitated but finally agreed to meet. At a coffee shop, he slid a flash drive across the table. "Watch the folder named Room 237. I asked if it involved Ethan. "It's bigger than him," he said. At home, I watched grainy footage of Vic entering classrooms unsupervised late hours. No logged maintenance. My stomach turned. I emailed my lawyer. She never replied. The day before court, Ethan came home with bruises. He wouldn't speak. I snapped photos and rushed to urgent care. They documented it, but when KSBS arrived, the agent said Ethan's account was inconsistent. Vic had vouched for me as an overwhelmed single mom. That night, my ex filed an emergency petition for full custody, citing mental instability. I screamed into my pillow, clutching Ethan's bear. I wasn't just losing my son, I was being erased. Court day, I wore black and carried Ethan's drawings like evidence. My lawyer hadn't shown, replaced last minute by a fresh-faced associate. Vic sat behind my ex, whispering. When the judge asked about Ethan's bruises, I showed the photos and tried to explain, but the KSBS report called them self-inflicted or accidental. My voice cracked. The judge frowned. I turned to the courtroom, held up the drawings. "My son is not lying." A few people stirred outside court. Reporters swarmed. I clutched Ethan's hand. A woman approached, whispering, "You're not crazy. My daughter had nightmares about him too." I asked for her number. She slipped me a note, then vanished. That night, I bought a nanny cam shaped like a stuffed animal. I sewed it inside Ethan's favorite bear. The next day, while I worked late, Vic came to drop off a forgotten jacket. He didn't know the camera was watching. I watched the footage with shaking hands. Vic entered our home with a key uninvited. He lingered near Ethan's room, touching the bear. "Such a good boy," he whispered. I screamed. The next morning, I walked into the police station with the footage on a flash drive. The officer on duty scoffed until I played the video. His face changed. "We'll need a statement," he said. I nodded, finally feeling the ground steady beneath me. Police raided Vic's home that afternoon. Inside, they found labeled flash drives, school memorabilia, and duplicate keys. Ethan's name was on a list. News spread fast. Vic arrested, charged with multiple counts. I watched from across the street, holding Ethan close. His eyes searched mine. "He's not coming back," he asked. "Never," I promised. That night, Ethan slept soundly for the first time in weeks. But I knew this wasn't the end, just the start of war. The next day, I received a call from Mr. Doyle's room 237. He said they tried to erase it. He met me with a binder, internal reports, incident complaints, all dismissed, names, dates, redactions, KSPS files marked inconclusive. It wasn't just Vic, it was the whole machine. Principal Harrison, the school board, even the original KSBS agent connected through a mentorship program Vic funded. Doyle looked me dead in the eye. "You were never crazy. You were dangerous." I mailed copies of Room 237 to every parent in the district. Within hours, whispers turned into fire. Mothers called me crying. One said her daughter never spoke again after second grade. Another confessed she once saw Vic alone with kids after hours, but stayed silent. Shame spread faster than justice. The town Facebook group exploded with demands for answers. Finally, the silence that had protected monsters was cracking, and I wasn't alone anymore. A former school nurse messaged me anonymously. She'd filed complaints about Vic's overfrequent hallway patrols and bruises she'd noticed. The files were misplaced, she said. Another email came from a janitor who quit years ago, said Vic kept a drawer locked in the staff room. My heart pounded. We weren't chasing a predator anymore, we were dismantling an entire protection network. Everyone who turned a blind eye had blood on their hands. I printed every email. Principal Harrison held a press conference. "We are cooperating fully," she said. But in the crowd, I recognized 3 parents from KSBS filings, her friends. That night, someone broke into Mr. Doyle's apartment. Nothing stolen, just files scattered. He called, voice shaking. They're panicking. I realized this wasn't about justice, it was survival. If we didn't push now, they'd erase everything again. I called every reporter I knew. This time, they were listening and watching. A reporter leaked the Room 237 files online. Within hours, a national news outlet picked it up. By night, our story was trending. I got a call from an FBI agent asking for a meeting. "This isn't just local," he said. "We're opening a case." My knees buckled. Ethan watched from the hallway, wide-eyed. "Did we win?" he asked. I pulled him close. "We started," I said. The storm was coming, but now I wasn't alone. My ex called me after seeing the footage on national TV. He cried, said he'd been wrong, said he was sorry. "I shouldn't have listened," he whispered. For once, I didn't need his validation. Ethan sat beside me, coloring. I nodded and said, "Just don't fight me anymore." That weekend, we signed a revised custody agreement. Sole custody mine. Ethan smiled for the first time in court. Vic's shadow had ruled our lives, not anymore. More victims came forward, teenagers now, but still carrying the weight of their childhoods. One had tried to overdose. Another spent years in silence. I listened to every call, took notes, promised to protect their identities. We built a private support group online. They called it the 237 Survivors. Together, we documented patterns, dates, failures. The group grew. It wasn't just Ethan anymore. We'd exposed a system, and now, we were becoming the reckoning. We launched a petition demanding the superintendent resign. Over 20,000 signatures flooded in. Local officials tried to ignore us, until protesters showed up at school board meetings with posters of Vic, headlines, Ethan's drawings. They couldn't hide anymore. Principal Harrison retired. The superintendent took a leave. I stood outside the district office holding Ethan's hand. He asked, "Did we change things?" I squeezed his fingers. "We're changing them, every day." The school board's lawyer emailed me a cease and desist over my public posts. I forwarded it to the journalist who broke our story. He tweeted it. Within minutes, support poured in. "They're scared," one parent wrote. "A retired KSBS agent called me. You're making waves," she said. "Big ones. I knew they'd try to silence me. But for every threat they sent, 10 more voices rose in support. They couldn't stop the truth anymore." The BI visited me again. This time with a list. "Do you recognize any of these names?" the agent asked. I scanned it. Teachers, aides, volunteers. One had babysat Ethan years ago. I nearly vomited. "We believe it's an organized cover-up," he said. My hands trembled as I circled 3 names. They nodded. "Thank you, this helps." That night, I locked every door twice. The truth was out, but so was the danger. A news anchor called me the mother who wouldn't back down. My inbox overflowed, some thanking me, others warning me to stop. I printed the threats and gave them to the BI. Ethan's therapist said he smiled more now, talked in full sentences again. I bought him a new bear. "This one doesn't need a camera," I told him. He nodded, hugging it tight. Justice wasn't done yet, but we were breathing easier finally. Principal Harrison was arrested. The charges: obstruction, destruction of evidence, and conspiracy. Her mugshot flooded the internet. I stared at it for hours. That face, so calm during our meetings, had hidden so much. Parents began speaking up at school events. "Not anymore," one father shouted during a town hall. "No more secrets." The silence was gone. We'd broken it. But I knew we still had more walls to tear down. I wasn't finished yet. A documentary team contacted me. They wanted to feature our story, Ethan, Room 237, The Survivors. I hesitated, fearing exposure. But Ethan said, "Maybe it'll help other kids." I agreed. Cameras rolled as I walked through the school parking lot. Voice steady. "This isn't just about us," I told them. "It's about every system that failed and every silence that let it." The footage would reach millions. This time, the world was watching. Mr. Doyle was reinstated as a teacher. The board never apologized, but the students did. "You were right," one whispered. I stood beside him at a press conference. "You believed me when no one else did," I said. He smiled through tears. "It was never just about me," he replied. That night, Ethan asked if Doyle could visit. "He helped save us, right?" I nodded. Truth had cost us so much, but it gave back too. We launched a foundation named after Room 237, grants for trauma therapy, parent advocacy training, legal help. Survivors from across the country wrote in. We held our first summit in a local gym. Posters covered the walls, Ethan's drawings among them. One mother said, "Your fight saved my child." I cried loudly, publicly, and for once, no one looked away. We'd turned pain into something powerful. Not healed, not whole, but stronger together. On Ethan's birthday, we lit 16 candles for him, for survivors, for every silenced child. He asked me, "Do the bad people still work in schools?" I paused. "Some," I said. "But fewer, because you were brave." He smiled and blew out the candles. I stood back, watching kids laugh, families eat cake. No fear, no shadows, just light, just life. And in that moment, I knew we had built something they couldn't erase. A final report from the BI landed on my doorstep, over 300 pages. Sealed with a federal stamp. "For your records," the letter read. I opened it slowly. Dozens of names, Networks cover-ups but also arrests, terminations, convictions, justice in ink and signatures, I cried, alone in the kitchen, not from grief but from relief. The paper proof that we were right. Ethan walked in, hugged me. We're safe now, he said, and we were. At the school's reopening ceremony, they unveiled a new wing, the Lawson Center for Child Safety. My name carved into stone. Ethan held my hand, the mayor gave a speech. But I barely heard it. I watched parents smile, kids run free. Mr. Doyle waved from the front row. We've won something bigger than court cases. We've reclaimed a place that once failed us, and maybe, just maybe, we built something that could never fail again. Sometimes late at night, I replay those first days, the doubt, the silence, the fight. I used to wonder if I'd gone too far, pushed too hard. But then I see Ethan sleep peacefully, laugh loudly, live freely. I grip the binder labeled Room 237, not out of fear but purpose. It reminds me what we survived, and what we changed. I'm no longer the scared mother. I'm the storm they never saw coming. Looking back, I lost trust, comfort, and pieces of my innocence. But I gained something unshakable: truth. Ethan and I speak openly now. Even about hard things, I've learned that silence isn't safety, it's surrender. Our scars are real, but they don't define us. Every child we help, every parent we arm with knowledge, adds meaning to what we endured. The past still echoes, but it no longer controls us. We walk forward, heads high, hands held. Victor Morrison remains in federal custody, no bail, no plea deals. Principal Harrison faces years behind bars. The superintendent resigned. Test BS reopened dozens of cases, and Room 237, permanently sealed, turned into a memorial wall for survivors. Ethan pressed his drawing into the bricks. So no one forgets, he said. Our community changed, not perfectly but permanently. We tore down a system and built a shield for those who couldn't speak. That's justice enough for now. Now Ethan plays outside without looking over his shoulder. I work part-time at the foundation. We hold weekly support calls, host legal clinics. I still carry the binder, sometimes not from fear, but to remind myself what one voice can spark. When a new mother joins our group, trembling, I say, "You're not alone." That's the legacy we built, not just safety, but solidarity, and it began the day I chose to believe my son.